Hi, I'm Stacy Blackwell. I'm the Senior Director of the Learning Centers, and my job today is simply to introduce you to the wonderful students that we have who are going to share their experiences with you and to moderate the panel. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our students for introductions. So if each of you could just share your name, your major, and your school.
Sure. Hi, my name is Arya Masand. I am a School of Arts and Sciences student majoring in math.
Hello, my name is Brittany Cullen. I am also a School of Arts and Science student, and I am a double major in linguistics and psychology.
Hi everyone, my name is Saini Mehta. I'm also a student in the School of Arts and Sciences, and I'm a criminal justice major.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eliza Padigano. I'm from the School of Engineering, and my major is aerospace engineering, and I'm hoping to become a pilot at some point.
Hi everyone, my name is Camila Correa. I am also in the School of Arts and Sciences, and my major is political science.
Wonderful, thank you all. So we're going to go ahead and just dive into our questions, but as was mentioned, for our audience, if you have any questions that come up, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so please drop them in the comments box. We'll be tracking those and we'll bring them back up to the panelists when it's time. So we're going to go ahead and start with the first question, which is around transparency and stress. So can you please describe where your mental energy and emotional energy is spent on academic efforts?
All right, so a lot of my mental and emotional energy was spent on grades and preparing for exams based on grades. I gave my academic coach an analogy. College felt like I was on a raft that always had holes in which water would gradually fill the boat, and was worried that the boat will sink and I will inevitably drown. And whenever I managed to fill the holes, another one would just open. And one of the most defeating mentalities that I had from this mentality was that no matter what I had done, the boat was going to sink, and my efforts in succeeding was reduced to null. It was not a matter of not studying at all. I had in fact studied a whole bunch, but all the knowledge I had accumulated had not been transferable to a packet of exam questions. It is easy to be defeated. I think most are fearful of failure. It can be daunting to have once failed and consider that as a life sentence. I think students should be taught that they aren't alone and that they don't have to be stuck in this boat alone. Encouraging office hours, telling students that they should study, what they should study for the exam, can be a really good help for students that need help in studying and all of that.
Okay, you covered it very well, Eliza. Thank you. We'll go to our next question. How does feeling overburdened impact your learning? And this question is we're going to start with Brittany and then go to Saini.
Yeah, so personally, the feeling of being overburdened gives rise to mental fatigue, stress, and even academic burnout. Being overburdened can take many forms, and the amount of work that leads to this feeling of being overwhelmed is subjective, varying from student to student. But speaking from past experiences, some of the courses that transpired a feeling of mental encumber usually required several textbook chapter readings, some weekly lecture quizzes, chapter quizzes, some sort of discussion post and homework assignment. Having a heavy workload for multiple courses can quickly accumulate these negative side effects of feeling overwhelmed. Mental fatigue makes it so that retention of course materials feels impossible to accomplish. If I feel too overburdened, I'm simply unable to recall or conceptualize course materials, making my weekly workload feel even more daunting. I, as well as many of my fellow students, am widely involved in a plethora of extracurricular activities, which also adds to this overwhelming sensation. This then translates into stress and academic burnout, which in turn causes overall dissatisfaction with the college experience. Stress makes learning feel like a chore. Learning should be fun and enriching, but the psychological impact of being overworked leads to dissatisfaction and disengagement with course materials. Learning turns from an act of bettering oneself to an act of simply obtaining a passing grade. This makes the continuation of education non productive because concepts aren't being stored in the long term memory, and this requires a heavier mental load to essentially relearn materials later on in the course. This is no way to learn because there are no meaningful connections being built and no long term retention taking place. The professors who I've had in the past that really lessened this feeling of being overburdened, or at least lessened these negative side effects, were those who varied their weekly workloads. It feels less draining knowing that a week that is a little more dense can be followed by a week that allows for more productivity. Having professors that did weekly check ins on how students were feeling mentally throughout the semester also assisted in lessening these feelings of being overburdened. Just having the satisfaction of knowing a professor cares about your success and is interested in your actual retention of materials helps to relieve the stress and anxiety that comes with feeling overwhelmed. It's not always up to the professors to alter their assignments to meet the students' current mental states, but it's always welcome to have instructors that take the time to ensure students' feelings of stress are validated and listened to.
Thank you very much, Brittany. I appreciate it. You made some really good comments there. And I appreciate you bringing it back to the things that can be done, right? What's productive and what can be useful for students. So thank you very much for that. Saini?
Yeah, Brittany, you did a great job with your answer, so really appreciate that. But in terms of feeling overburdened, in my personal experience, I've been fortunate with my time here at Rutgers and all of the professors that I've had and instructors that I've had in being very approachable and very accommodating when it comes to me feeling overburdened. For me personally, I am a first generation American. My parents immigrated from India, and they don't know fluent English, and oftentimes rely on me to come back home and take care of things or help them with things. And that, coupled with work and school stress and all of that kind of stuff, can make me feel very overburdened. And oftentimes, when I feel overburdened, I tend to push things away, and in doing so, I fall behind. And everything like that, which just increases the problem. But I think with overburdening, with feeling overburdened, Brittany mentioned it earlier, but it could really make learning not fun, and it could really decrease retention. So I think in terms of um, going back in and kind of talking to students about where they are mentally and physically, doing things such as doing a mid-semester check-in with students, gauging how people are feeling mentally, gauging how assignments are going, and everything like that can really help. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Thank you, Saini. And I appreciate that we heard two perspectives of where some of this overburden feeling comes from, right? That there are those outside of course things that instructors may or may not see. And then there's also the internal to course things that instructors have some control over. And there was a question in the chat about how many courses were the students taking per semester. So Eliza, you said 16 credits, 4 courses, 4 credits each. Brittany and Saini, can you tell us how many credits you were taking as well?
Yeah, Brittany, I'll just go real quick. This semester in particular, I'm a last semester senior, so I'm taking 14 credits. With four courses. But in the past, as a student at SAS, we've always been told that in order to graduate, you need 120 credits by the time by the time the spring rolls around in your senior year. And with that being said, I think the typical course load for students is 5 classes around 15 credits each. Now it is different. Eliza's in the School of Engineering, so her course load and her credit load might be different compared to us in SAS, but that is typically what I've heard and what I have done throughout my time here at Rutgers.
Great, thank you. Brittany, how many credits for you?
For me, this semester, I'm currently taking 16 credits as well. I'm taking 5 3-credit courses and then one credit course. However, there have been, especially during the pandemic, there were semesters where I was taking upwards to 18 credits, but that's because I'm a double major too, so it could be different for everyone.
Great, thank you. All right, I am going to get back to our planned questions, but I do want to ask, there's one question, there are 2 questions in chat. One I'm going to ask now, one I'm going to save for a couple minutes. But you both sort of talked about, I know we asked the question of when you feel overburdened and how that impacts your learning. But Saini, you also mentioned something about learning possibly being fun. So can you describe an example when learning was fun and perhaps even memorable? And this is open to anyone, just let me know you want to answer.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna use specific names, but I took a course at Rutgers over us being online, fully online, I believe 2 semesters ago, called U.S. Housing Policy. That class was something that was very just the course material in general was extremely interesting to me, and it was taught in a manner that was highly engaging and that I was easy to understand. And the professor for that particular course had all of the expectations laid out, and things like that. So when I was taking the course, I wasn't stressed out in terms of, oh my goodness, like what's going to be on the exam, what do I need to learn, what do I need to do. Everything that was going to be on the exam was very the professor was very upfront and forward with, and that made me feel more at ease, which made it more fun to learn and engage with the material because I wasn't as stressed out because there was that transparency in the course, which I'm sure my fellow panelists can attest to, makes students feel at ease. So that was a time where it was fun and memorable for me.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Camila. Tell us about a time when learning was fun and memorable for you.
So I also had sorry, this is echo. I also had like this specific course that I really enjoyed. And the thing is, it had like kind of set assignments for us to do. So every week we had to do a reading, and then in class we would do a group activity based off of that reading. But what I really enjoyed about that group activity was it was always a little bit different from last time. And sometimes we would get paired with different people. So I think that really helped me get to know other people in Rutgers, especially since that was the first semester coming back after the pandemic. So it really let me kind of, work on the assignment, but also talk to other people, joke around a little bit. And there were also some activities where we were literally kind of like throwing things around the classroom. So not something that you would typically, expect from a college course, right? But it really helped kind of lighten the mood sometimes when, some weeks might have been stressful, but I knew when I would come to this class that I would kind of have like a light break or something I could actually enjoy and have fun.
Great, thank you. And our last answer to this question, Arya, what makes class feel fun and memorable to you?
Sure. So as a math major, sometimes people come up to me and say my classes may be a bit dry or they're very lecture heavy and dense in that way. But the courses that I've enjoyed the most and found the most memorable experiences with are those which allow you to kind of understand the real world application and how that material that you're learning really applies outside of just this concentrated classroom. And so I had a mathematics course last semester in which we would finish off our lesson with how what we learned really was linked to a topic, maybe in computer science or maybe in economics, and how those applications of the mathematics could really help to solve real world problem based issues. So just understanding that what I'm doing is not existing in a vacuum and there's a useful aspect to the material is definitely what allowed me to have a memorable experience.
Great, thank you so much. And I see a lot of comments coming in through the chat, which I'm thrilled about. We are going to save some time after each section or to the end to answer all of those. So if your question's not being answered right away, I promise we're getting to it. But I do want to go to our next planned question because I think it's touching on some things people have already talked about and also will expand on that a bit. So can you give examples of how instructors offered clarity that relieved some of this anxiety that we've been talking about? And Arya, ironically, that's actually going to you. So take it away.
Sure. So with regard to clarity that relieved anxiety, personally, I know a lot of students, just as I do, may struggle with procrastination, especially being online and being remote. So with regard to structure, having modules and having announcements each week, allowing students to really know what is demanded of them to get done in that period of time. I had a professor in a course who had weekly quizzes. And so in a way, it was sub-goaling, right? Each week you're getting done a little bit of the material so that by the end, when all of that material is an aggregate for, say, a midterm or a final, um, there was clarity in regard that you've looked at the material piecemeal. So the ability to provide clarity through structure in maybe your learning management system like Canvas, through announcements, and even in class, say we're back in person now, right? Um, Being in person, just maybe at the end of class saying, okay, by next class, we have to have this done, this is due, try and maybe catch up on this. And then starting off that next class with, okay, this is what was supposed to be done. We're going to do this lecture, and at the end, once again, for next class. So just communication and oftentimes a bit of structure. We want students to self-regulate in college, and that's a big part of it because we have things outside of just that course. But at the same time, a bit of structure goes a long way for allowing students to be able to appropriately self-regulate, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that cannot be overstated enough, right? That structure can go a really long way. So thank you. Our next question, and I think I have a feeling this is one, based on the questions that are coming in the chat, I have a feeling this is one people are going to be very interested in. So do you have recommendations for when you're kind of feeling that way, when the workload or other things going on in your life are starting to get to you? Do you have recommendations for how instructors can refuel your learning? And this one's going to go to Brittany first and then to Saini.
Yes. Okay, so varying the course format is crucial in keeping students interested, engaged, and willing to learn. Lecture formats are still very frequently used, and it can kind of lead to this lackluster learning environment. Some of my favorite courses implemented creative approaches to problem solving and instilled an array of activities during the lessons to keep engagement very high. One of the most beneficial activities one of my past professors incorporated was during the first week of classes, in which we engaged in the stereotypical team building exercises. Now, I'm not saying that these activities have to be conducted solely during the first week of classes, as they can be beneficial anytime throughout the semester, but these were fun and engaging activities that allowed the students to feel comfortable and competent working together. By fostering this safe and inclusive atmosphere, it was easier to collaborate in groups during class time, and it was actually an aspect of the course that we all grew very fond of. So providing students with various activities, media, and interactive elements can definitely be revitalizing to the classroom, especially when professors take the time within the class to ensure all students feel at ease working with one another. In larger lecture settings, it may be difficult to achieve such interactivity, and in that case, the emphasis turns to forging meaningful connections from the course content to relevant events or facets of the students' lives. Being lectured to on information that feels irrelevant can be exhausting and not always the most enriching experience. However, finding out new ways that this information can be used and how it's applicable outside of the classroom can reinstill interest in topics that otherwise may be viewed as more mundane. All in all, creating a classroom that is conducive to group work is a key to refueling and revitalizing the learning experience. Interacting with peers is fundamental in regards to being a successful learner, and this can be an enjoyable experience as long as students are able to feel safe working with one another.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Go ahead, Saini.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brittany. So in terms of refueling, I know personally speaking from my classes in the criminal justice department here at Rutgers, I've always felt that instructor one of the most difficult jobs that instructors have is being is trying to read the room and trying to gauge where students are in terms of their interaction and engagement with the material. This can't be easy, right? Especially in some of these bigger lecture halls with 200 people, you're bound to have somebody who is not paying attention, doing something else on their laptop, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of this, I think kind of going back to what Brittany was saying, something that's helped me in the past, and I know this can't be done or it's very hard for it to be done, with particular majors or courses, but doing things like group activities one day, like Brittany mentioned, doing group activities maybe on a Tuesday and then on Thursday doing a more lecture-based class, um, can help make the material that we're learning uh, feel more fun in a way. I've liked doing group work in in-person classes. With online classes it's a bit tougher, but with in-person classes I've always liked interacting with my peers and all that kind of stuff, and it's made me more engaged and it's made the class feel different at times, which has kind of made me refuel in a way. But I found that with instructors maybe even sharing a personal story that relates to the material, or pausing and just asking students how they feel with the material, or even doing um or even asking students to maybe explain some concepts in their own way or elaborate on how things are going, can go a long way in bringing students back with the lesson. But it's very much so, it's easier said than done, right? And but going back to what Brittany said, if you create that inclusive environment and you create that safe space where people are able to share their thoughts and ideas, I think it can go a long way in helping students feel more comfortable when it comes to your class, especially in a room of first year students. When you come from high school to a huge school like Rutgers, it could be a massive culture shock. And I think by giving students that feeling of what they had in high school in terms of being able to share their thoughts on, and just their ideas on a lesson, can go a long way in refueling our learning.
Thank you so much. And I see Arya wanted to also add on to this response. Go ahead, Arya.
Sure. So I really believe motivation is very intimately related to refueling learning. And so a quick tip potentially for pedagogical content knowledge would be to utilize the music model. And that's big in education for motivation. And I'm sure many professors and educators have heard of it. But just as a reminder, maybe the ideas of empowerment, usefulness, success, interest, and caring. I think in order to refuel learning, you really have to refuel the students' desire to be motivated to learn the course material. And so potentially utilizing that music model when teaching would help.
Great, thank you so much. And I do see more questions coming in the chat. We're continuing to answer them in written text, but I will bring a few to the panel verbally as we get through a couple more questions. So we are going to move on to part 2. And I think that this is actually going to answer some of the questions that we're getting to in the comments box, where we really wanted to connect this idea of mental health and well-being overall to engagement and empowerment of the student experience. So we're going to talk a little bit about autonomy, self-sufficiency, and self-direction. And for our first question, if we can move on to that, we are going to go to Brittany for this one. At the start of a course, if you could tell your instructor one thing they could do that would make you feel confident or capable, what would that be?
So nowadays, with classes still being conducted in a hybrid manner, emphasizing flexibility and consistency at the start of a course can ease anxieties and make students feel confident and capable of success. Consistency can take the shape of weekly material uploads at the same designated day and time of the week, consistent due dates throughout the semester, and consistent interactions between instructors and students. Students such as myself plan their schedules well in advance. Therefore, instilling a routine can be essential in alleviating the stress that encompasses a hectic college schedule. I've had professors in the past that lacked in communicating with students, creating confusion and stress in terms of their expectations for us as a class. On the other hand, professors who have taken time out of the week to communicate the course learning objectives for that topic and what is expected of us to complete help to cultivate a feeling of competence throughout the entirety of the course. Flexibility and being willing to make accommodations can also provide a feeling of confidence. Just knowing that a professor cares enough about facilitating our actual learning and one who is not strictly about getting materials in at a designated date/time can really uplift motivation and create students who feel more invigorated to do the coursework to the best of their abilities. I've found in the past that those professors who make note of being accommodating are the ones whose courses get first priority because it's refreshing and energizing to possess an instructor who takes initiative in ensuring us students are left with the knowledge that is meant for us and understand that sometimes the process of learning doesn't always follow a linear pattern. Having some wiggle room to truly take our time and understand the material is extremely beneficial and leaves us students feeling empowered and autonomous in our own educational careers.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And our next question, I think, is actually going to get also to a question in the chat that says, so I'll read the chat question and then our planned question, and I think we're going to respond to both at one time. But it says, what can instructors do to encourage students to reach out when they feel overwhelmed, let them know they don't have to suffer in silence? And I know that what we had prepared for was what makes you feel safe to speak up, to ask questions, or to discuss sensitive topics. So Arya, if you can respond to just one or both of those, but for the rest of the panel, if you can also be thinking about that question that came up in the chat as well. So Arya, I'm going to go to you for our planned question, and then we'll go to the chat question.
All right. So what makes me feel safe to speak up, ask questions, or discuss sensitive topics? The very first thing I would say is for the professor to start the narrative. Will my concerns be heard? Will my concerns be brushed off? Or am I a learning individual to my professor? Or am I merely just a student? Am I safe in being wrong, or will I learn from being wrong? I think the biggest daunting feeling is when a professor asks questions to the audience, and all you can hear is the little scratching of the pencils, and you see students like look in the air and everything like that. I think like the only person that break that cold silence in lecture is the person who is always right, because no one ever wants to be the person who is wrong. Even if a student gets it wrong, quite confidently I might add, we must have it in ourselves to address the person, the wrong. Personally, it's more important to address a student who is learning than the student who has already learned. Because to never address the learning individual, would that individual ever learn without correction? Will the other students who never said anything understand the work and thought process towards the right answer? If you want to promote a constructive environment, never treat yourself as if you're on a podium teaching students through examples. Teach students through mistakes because mistakes are inevitable and there's something more rewarding than finally understanding the why or how to an answer than just what to do. Once we're able to establish that, we can move from passive learning to an active learning. Encourage the ability to be wrong, because through being wrong, we are capable of doing right for once. And to answer the other question, like how do students feel publicly sharing their check-in responses? I worry that students won't share this personal information. To what I would have to say to that is like give them the option to like publicly share the check-in responses. Of course, like sometimes they might be not comfortable in doing that, but if they are willing to do that, allow them to. And it's really up to the students for that because it is also a teamwork effort in like the learning process. You have the teacher and you have the students. Sometimes the students have to put effort to be able to do this and to give out that connection to the overall student body and towards the professor. And that'll be it.
Great. Thank you so much, Eliza. And Camila, you wanted to respond to the question in the chat as well, I believe?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So I believe the question in the chat was specifically about what instructors could do to encourage students to reach out to them feel overwhelmed. And I will let you know, the best thing you can do is to just repeat it as much as you can. So what I mean by that is I want you to put in your syllabus, I'm here to help you. If you guys need accommodations or if you're feeling overwhelmed, reach out to me. If you post any announcements, you can end it by saying, again, you can always reach out to me if you need any extra help or need extra time. Or even in emails privately to students or like mass emails, just keep repeating again and again the same message. Because honestly, what I've kind of find out from my peers and myself, if you keep repeating it, we'll actually take it as, genuine effort that you guys want to help us and are willing to, maybe make some accommodations for us. Because there's sometimes when professors maybe mention it once and they're like, oh, if you need maybe some extra help, just come to me after class. And just kind of dismissively. While you may be genuine in that moment, we might not receive it as such because it might have been so quickly. But if you keep trying to plug in that same message, we will honestly take it as something sincere. And I think that we will be more willing to reach out to you because of that. I also find that some people might feel uncomfortable actually reaching out to a professor if it's like face to face. So maybe kind of let students know that they don't necessarily need to catch you after class, but they can simply send you an email or set a time to kind of meet on Zoom, so that they can mentally prepare to do that. But yeah, I think those are some things that professors could do.
Thank you so much. And Saini, and then we're going to go to our next question.
Yeah, just a few things to kind of piggyback off of Eliza and Camilla. I think what Camilla said was perfect. Last semester, I had the pleasure of teaching my very own course here at Rutgers through the FIGS department. I got to teach 21 first-year students about exploring criminal justice, and in that, being a first-year student is extremely hard. Like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like a culture shock, right? Entering a university with 40,000 students is unbelievable, and for many, that the act of doing that can be very daunting. So, with everything I announce and everything I did in class, I always, try to make an effort to say that, while I am your instructor, I'm also here to help you, whether you feel overwhelmed or discouraged in any way of doing anything. I can be an ally to you. I can be someone who can help you find the proper resources and help you get the proper help you need. Because as instructors, you do teach people your material, but you are also mentors in a way to students. So it's very important to do that. A second thing I'd like to add is a part of every syllabus is the Rutgers resources. But the one thing I've seen over the past 4 years is that professors don't take the time to go over what each resource means, right? Now, there's very valuable things on there, like CAPS. CAPS is they essentially provide mental health services for students who are in need. And what a lot of people don't know is that they're free. All of the services that they provide are free, and there's so many like that here at Rutgers that if professors were to not constantly bring it up, but when going over the syllabus were to bring it up and kind of take some time to explain what each of them do and what they're meant for, I think that can go a long way in students being able to find the help they need. And lastly, about publicly sharing feedback. I know it was mentioned earlier. I apologize. I can't remember who, but it was about publicly sharing feedback with the class. One thing that helped me was I released a Google form to my students via QR code about halfway through the semester. And in that Google form, I didn't ask to collect names, but I did require that each question be answered. So what that helped me do is it helped me get my students' thoughts and their kind of like their status and how they're doing all in one place so that I could then broadly address it. Now, if students did want to come to me, I preface that, if some of these things are happening to you or they might be very overwhelming to you, please come see me. And again, it just goes back to what Camilla was saying. You got to say it again and again and again, because that's the only way students will come to you and kind of get the help they need. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say, but thank you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we're going to go on to our next planned question. And I'm still keeping track of the chat. Okay. All right, so we're going to look at, we've been talking a lot about communication between the instructor and the students and clarity and being upfront about things. But we want to kind of be a little bit more specific now on the question of communication. So Arya, can you describe when communication either broke down or when it was really strengthened within a course?
Sure. So with regard to one instance when it broke down, I had an instructor who was consistent with making announcements towards the beginning of the course and really checking in with students and outlining what was to be done and all of those requirements. But I would say towards maybe the middle of the course, they felt that the students kind of understood the course and the way that the course was going to go. And so they kind of weaned off of those announcements. But this was a course that we were still virtual. It was last year. So I would say the fact that there were less announcements and less of those check-ins really broke down communication to a certain degree. And the professor kind of noticed that and took account of it during synchronous lecture, mentioning that, okay, we've had less engagement, or the homework assignments are not done, or they're not done on the time that they're usually supposed to be done. So I would say that was one instance where I guess the professor felt that it was far on into the semester that students would understand the drift of the course. But just having that structure and the fact that that was already there for some students may have been a shock to not have the announcement or to have the check-in from the professor. And once that occurred and that was taken into consideration, the announcements kind of were phased back in and students were more engaged. So I would say the communication was strengthened afterwards, after noticing the difference. And that's something that, you have to be very hands-on with when you're teaching a course, right? As educators and professors must definitely do know and take into consideration. Some things work, some things don't. And just staying consistent, I would say, with that communication is what allows it to be strengthened. One more thing with regard to strengthened communication, I had a course in which the professor would usually just put in the material into the files section of Canvas without really organizing it in a, I would say, manageable way. So they would just be files and they weren't in a specific order. Whereas when there's modules on Canvas or something that's organized potentially by week or by chapter, subject, whatever it may be, it allows for communication to be strengthened because it outlines exactly what is needed from the student. And that's what I would say. The utilization of modules is what strengthened that communication.
That's great. Thank you. I love that there was a recognition too midway and sort of the willingness to change things around. It's fantastic. Thank you. For our next question, we can go. Okay. Do you have the opportunity or strategies to support your peers and describe what this looks like? So I love this question because, at the Learning Centers, we are all about peers supporting peers. But when we think about that in terms of the student experience and what you actually have in class, tell us what this looks like. And this question is going to start with Camila, and then we will go to Saini.
Yeah, so I think the main method in which students will likely communicate to each other, if not inside the classroom, is really through GroupMe. And honestly, I think it's a pretty great app because it really makes those students who are perhaps too shy in class to ask questions, or maybe they were absent that day for any personal reason, they're able to kind of just reach out to their peers through that app, right? So I see many days when we get like big projects assigned, people always send questions like to clarify, oh, do they want it this font, or like how many pages, or what is the question necessarily about? What are you guys thinking about this, that, and whatnot? So it really helps open the dialogue, and I think it's kind of a great platform to do that if you're not really too familiar with your peers in class. Another thing that I have kind of told some of my friends, at least, when they're kind of struggling with classwork, or they're not sure whether they should take this much of a credit load, I tell them give themselves like 2 weeks to get used to it. Because I feel like, at least for me, 2 weeks is when I kind of, figure out how I work, or how much time I need to dedicate to this course, or how much time I require studying for that course. It really is kind of a learning experience. So maybe in the first week, you're going to mess up a lot in a specific course, but then you always have that second week and those weeks afterwards to make up for it. And again, if it's the beginning of a semester, then that's the perfect time to kind of make those mistakes because you always have the option for the add drop period. So I really think that one, use GroupMe. I would encourage your students to use GroupMe and talk to each other. Most classes will already have like GroupMe's there pre-made for them. And then two, encourage students to just in that first 2 weeks to make those mistakes because it won't really, hit them that hard as they think it will.
Thank you so much. I'm loving the theme of mistakes. And by the way, for those of you who are listening, we didn't plan out responses, so the students didn't actually know what each other were going to say. So as you're seeing themes and similarities, those are actually arising really naturally and authentically through the conversation. So, Saini, can you respond to that same question? The opportunity or strategies to support your peers and describe what that looks like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Camila really touched on like the big one, right? GroupMe and having that ability to communicate with other students outside of class. I know oftentimes when assignments are about to be submitted, I come up with a million questions in my head, and it's nice to see that people also have those questions in GroupMe and they're constantly answering them and all that kind of stuff. But for me personally, I think I might have a bit of a leg up in terms of talking about strategies to support peers. In class, I often think people. Sorry, I just saw a question pop up in the chat.
That's okay. Just focus on the question you have now. We'll get to that one in a minute.
Okay. So yeah, so in terms of me personally, I think I do have a bit of a leg up in terms of the support strategies that we can offer our peers. I don't think that those strategies really come from within the class, but more so outside the class. In terms of in class, all we can really do is make that GroupMe with just students and have that open space to discuss things with each other. But in terms of outside the class, I'm always shamelessly like plugging the learning centers and all of the opportunities it has in terms of writing coaching and academic coaching and tutoring and so much more. And also oftentimes the support that students need isn't in an academic way per se, but it's more so maybe something to do with their personal lives, something to do with maybe something's going on in their families, and they may not they may not be there. While they are physically there, it's hard for them to learn because their mind is elsewhere. So I think in terms of from an instructor standpoint, I think going back and really, talking about each and every single one of those Rutgers resources that students have for free can really go a long way in terms of providing that support. But yeah, that's basically it.
Great, thank you so much. So we're coming up on our last section here where we wanted to address accessibility and equity as they relate to students' well-being and thinking about how removing barriers can potentially remove stress and anxiety as well. So we'll go to our first question. What approaches to access would you recommend to alleviate students' stress? And this is going to go to Eliza.
Thank you. All right. So my advice is my advice in building your course or Canvas site or just anything is to make your course and Canvas site like an example of how you want your students to study. If you want your students to make those mountains into small like molehills, then organize your information in weekly modules. Provide lecture notes to bring home, the most important point and steps, provide information for the upcoming week so students can prepare. Perhaps there will be doubts in which students won't even use it, I'll be putting effort into nothing. To which I say, we can only help those who are willing to be helped. But nothing is more devastating than needing to be helped and nothing to be there for us. So cast that lifeline and let those who need it, take it.
Great, thank you so much. Does anyone want to add on to that question? What approaches to access would you recommend that alleviate stress? Okay, we have lots of questions coming in the chat, so we're going to keep going so we can get to some of those by within the next couple of minutes. So our next question is, what accessibility features make learning smoother, more comfortable, or more efficient for you? And we're going to start with Camila for this one and then go to Arya.
I think the main thing for me that has really helped with my studies would have to be professors sharing their PowerPoints or whatever material they're using during class with the students afterwards. Um, a lot of times you're going to be in a classroom and you're going to be taking down notes as fast as you can. And sometimes you can't keep up with everything, right? And you might have missed some like really important information that you just don't remember it. Um, and then you don't have anything to look back at, and that can hurt you sometimes. So what I've noticed is actually during the pandemic, I think this kind of increased more often. Professors were starting to share the materials that they were using during their class and their presentations, and that I think really worked wonders for me because I was able to go back after class and look at this stuff that was being discussed, and then I could be like, oh right, that's what he meant during this specific section, or oh, I should probably put that in my notes. And it also really helps when I'm trying to complete some assignments and I need a like refresher, because sometimes, you know, you might learn something Monday, and then the next week's Monday, you have an assignment due on it. And, you know, students won't work on everything right away. So having that kind of material right there for you to use and have access to is really beneficial for many students. Another thing that I've found is very helpful is having professors, you know, post recorded lectures. The only issue that I have realized with this is that then sometimes that might discourage students from actually attending courses. So it's kind of a, you know, an iffy situation there. It will help with students again to like refresh the content, but then you might also have students who don't end up coming to class afterwards. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Thank you so much, Camila. And just a quick moment before we get to you, Arya. I know we are coming up at the end of our time, and that's because we've had an amazing audience who is so engaged in sending us wonderful questions. So we really appreciate that. And I just want to let everyone know we're going to let Arya respond to our last question, which is this one. And then our wonderful panelists have agreed to give us a few more minutes. So for those of you who do have questions and you want to stay on for a little bit, we do have a little bit of wiggle room for a few extra minutes after this. All right, Arya, go ahead.
Sure. So with regard to accessibility features that make learning smoother or more comfortable, I'm going to be speaking a bit to the online aspect or remote aspect. I would say multiple modes of instruction was very helpful. So that could be through the utilization of the chat, through the implementation of transcription, through recording, as I believe Brittany mentioned, or Camille rather. And the utilization of whiteboards, breakout rooms, all of those modes of instruction that were varied, I would say, throughout lecture and throughout teaching, allowed for learning to be smoother, because oftentimes you want students to focus in and you want students to retain information, but it is also tough to keep them engaged. So varying that, the modes of instruction allowed for a smoother transition towards creating retention, long-term retention, and having a more efficient session. And this can also somewhat be translated to in-person, right? Varying modes of instruction can be on the online space, the remote space, as well as in person. So you can maybe do PowerPoints, you can do videos, you can do some real world application and team building exercises, cooperative learning. So it can be the modes of instruction as well as the way in which you cater the learning. That's what I would say was helpful.
Great, thank you so much. And I just, I want to take a minute. I know I said we're going to stay on for a little bit longer, we will, but I just want to take a minute to thank our panelists. You all have been absolutely fantastic. I know that hearing your ideas, hearing your experience has been a tremendous help to me. And I know that it has been to our audience, because I can see all of the activity that's going on in the chat, which has been fantastic. So thank you all very, very much. And thank you also for agreeing to give us just a couple more minutes. So to our audience members, if you have some last minute questions that you want to pop in the chat, you can. But I hope that you have learned as much and gained as much from our panelists as I have. So thank you all so much. And we'll just give a couple minutes to see what questions come in the chat. Oh, we're just getting lots of praise for you panelists, just so you know. Lots and lots of praise for the wonderful things that you shared there. We have the members of the panel are awesome. Thank you for sharing with us. Absolutely. Okay, so we are going to wrap up here, but please, if you do want to speak more to students, keep in mind that at the Learning Centers, we employ a great number of peer leaders. If you want them to come visit your class, talk about the services we have, talk about their experiences. We know that this place does not work without the amazing, phenomenal students that we have at Rutgers. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists. You've been fantastic and we really appreciate you. And I hope that everyone just has a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.